Hello everyone. Today we're going to go through some of the questions in page 27 of our weather booklet, where we're going to learn also about some of the ideas about how heat gets to our planet. And these ideas would normally be done as a reading in our class, but I will have to post that reading online, or you can follow along with the ideas that we're going to present here by answering these questions. So the first question is, why did people put the apple pie on the windowsill to cool in the olden days? So this is a classic example that we see in cartoons a lot of the time, especially older cartoons, is they would take a hot apple pie or whatever, and they put it out on the windowsill to cool. And one of the reasons we would do that is because wind and air is moving a little bit more freely outside, usually inside your house. Your house is warm, or usually warmer than the outside of the house, especially if you just finished baking up a nice pie. So outside you got this cold air and the hot pie. So the hot pie will heat up the air particles around it. Those hot air particles will move away very quickly because as soon as you give energy to a particle, it gains kinetic energy, and so it can move. It moves away, rising into the air, and then cold air will come down and take its place. And as the cold air replaces it, it gets heated up and it takes heat away from the pie, moves up into the air. More cold air comes in, takes heat away from the pie, moves into the air, etc., etc., etc. And that is going to create a convection cycle that will take the heat away from the pie. If you think about a roast chicken and get a different idea, so this is a question is, if you touch a roast chicken lightly enough, you won't get it might feel cold, but as soon as you hold on to, you grab a grip of it, you might burn yourself. Well, what's happening there is this is the transfer by conduction. Conduction depends on contact. So if you have contact with the object, then the conduction is going to be more effective. So the more contact you make, the more heat that can transfer to you. Your hand is colder than the chicken, so when you grab hold of it with a big strong grip, your hand gets burned real bad. Okay, if you had some roast chicken and it's cool enough to touch on the surface, but it's hot on the inside, what's happening? Well, here we have an example where the inside of the chicken doesn't have anywhere for the heat to go. Heat goes from hot to cold. That is always going to be the case, that heat will always transfer. Heat transfer is always going to move from hot to cold. There is no going backwards. Any heat transfer is a movement of heat from the hot to the cold. So every time you want to identify a heat transfer, always identify which object was colder, which object was hotter, and the heat will travel from hot to cold. So if you're thinking about sticking ice cubes into your glass to cool it down, what's actually happening is, in the case of a cup where you put an ice cube in, the heat does not transfer from the ice cube out. The heat goes from the water molecules that are in your water. They are transferring heat to the water molecules in the ice. So the transfer is always going from the hot water into the icy ice cube molecule. So heat goes from hot to cold. If you are talking about a chicken that is completely sealed, so the inside of this chicken, that's my ugly chicken here, in this chicken, inside of the chicken, it's all hot. So the heat has nowhere to go. It will randomly be moving around and moving from slightly hotter to slightly cooler molecules all throughout the chicken, but it doesn't actually have anywhere to go. In fact, that top layer of the chicken is purposely there to keep it insulated. That works when the creature is alive. It also works when it's not alive. So it gets meanwhile the outside of the chicken is in contact with the air molecules, and those air molecules are a lot cooler. So there's going to be, from hot to cold, there's a place for it to travel. But when the chicken is completely sealed in, there's nowhere for the heat to go, so it gets trapped inside. All right, Now we're going to change modes here. We're going to talk about something called electromagnetic radiation, or electromagnetic spectrum. This is so this question asks what type of waves does the sun emit? Research the sun and the electromagnetic spectrum to answer this question. So we don't have to talk about this very much, but we have mentioned this idea a little bit, that energy is carried by a particle known as a photon. And that photon comes in a couple of different varieties. They come as radio waves, as microwaves, as infrared radiation, visible radiation, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, and gamma rays. Excuse me. So, in the case of solar radiation is mostly our sun being as hot as it is. It mostly emits radiation in what is known as the infrared, visible, and ultraviolet range. So it's relatively narrow compared to the rest of it. It does emit a little bit of everything else, but we call the energy that comes out infrared, visible, and ultraviolet. Now, some of this you might know something about. The visible spectrum is the light that you can see. So those are the colors that the human eye can see: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. All of those colors, those count as the visible spectrum. So those are all different photons of different amounts of energy, and our eye can see them all. The infrared spectrum is a spectrum of energy that is commonly associated with heat. So a hot body of a living organism will usually emit in the infrared radiation. It's not as powerful, it's not as energetic as the radiation in the visible light spectrum. It is infra. Infra here means before or lower. So lower than red. So remember that our spectrum of visible light goes red to purple, or red to violet. So the infra is lower, less energy than red. On the other side of it is the ultraviolet. Ultra means more. So infra, this is less. And then ultra means more. So ultraviolet is more than violet. It's higher energy than violet. It's more dangerous. And of course, ultraviolet radiation from the sun is what causes skin cancer, for example, or one of the causes of skin cancer is ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Infrared radiation is below red. It's usually not something you really come into contact very much with, although there's definitely some infrared radiation coming out of your stove and your oven when they are hot. When your oven turns red hot, just before that, as you can feel the heat before it turns red, that's infrared radiation you're feeling. So it is a radiation. You can feel it. It can cause stuff to happen. It's just that you can't see it. Actually, if you put your hand above somebody's hand, if you put your hand into somebody else's hand or just above it, and you can feel that heat between your hands, or between any living organism that's warm, if you can feel the warmth off their body, what you're feeling is the infrared radiation. You can't see the color. You can't see this red radiation coming off them, but you can feel the infrared radiation. So that's what you're feeling. Okay, so what types of waves does the Earth emit? Well, the fact that you can feel any warmth from any object on our planet means that the Earth does have some energy that it emits. It emits infrared radiation. So you can't see it, but it is warm to the touch. So that is infrared, and that's on average. Of course, something like snow, not very much infrared radiation coming off of that. It's very, very cold. Meanwhile, put your hand into some black dirt. If you have some black soil that you can, really dark soil in the middle of the summer, you're going to put your hand on that, and it'll actually feel quite warm. Or sand, that could feel quite warm. It's not bright. It's not colored that you can see, but you can see you can feel that infrared energy. So Earth absorbs energy from the sun all the time. Why does the Earth not get hotter and hotter? Well, even though Earth absorbs energy, it also emits energy. We just said above that it emits radiation, emits infrared radiation. So that infrared radiation goes back into space. So there's some of the energy that's gone. Also, some of the energy is absorbed and turned into other energy types like heat and chemical energy, which gets used. Okay, describe what happens to the energy from the Earth as it reaches the Earth's orbit, the Earth's atmosphere in terms of being absorbed and reflected. So that's to do with this picture that we see here. So in this picture, you can see that a lot of the harmful ultraviolet radiation gets reflected, and any of the radiation, in fact, including the visible and the infrared. Some of that gets reflected by the air, by the clouds, by the ground. That adds up to about 30% of the energy from space. So from the sun, 30% of that energy is turned away simply by hitting the ground or hitting the clouds and hitting the air. And another 70% of that energy then is turned into some sort of absorption, either absorbed by the air itself, heating up our atmosphere. It could be absorbed in clouds, heating up the clouds, causing them to rise up into the air possibly. And it also could be absorbed by the earth, and this will be including absorbed by plants, right? So plants absorb ultraviolet radiation and turn that into photosynthesis. You have you walking around, you absorb sunlight to feel warm, or your cells might absorb some ultraviolet radiation and become damaged, for example. There's all sorts of other things. Even the ground, if you've ever gone to the beach and you've walked on sand, you'll notice the sand is very, very hot, and that's because it has absorbed sunlight all day long and it's gotten hotter and hotter until when you stand on it, you get some conduction between you and the sand. What is the only way for the energy to travel from the sun to the earth? Well, the energy can only travel by radiation, since there's very little matter between the sun and the earth. Name the categories of electromagnetic rays. We said infrared, visible, ultraviolet. How does the earth maintain a relatively constant temperature? We just said it changes the absorbed energy into heat. It also changes it into photosynthesis or chemicals, and it can also even turn it into power, like in a solar panel. So you can have a solar panel which converts that energy into some sort of power source or some sort of other types of energy, like a battery. All right, hopefully you found that that informative, and I will make sure to post some extra videos into the weather playlist or the companion playlist, and we'll talk to you in the next video. Have a great day.